Welcome to my channel. Today I'm painting this trio of sea urchins. There's lots of good stuff in this video. I'll show you my 3 favorite tools for applying masking fluid. We'll use a wet on wet technique to let colors mingle on the paper. And we'll use negative painting to create definition and shadows around the different sea urchins. The end result is a painting that glows. First, let me go over the supplies I used. I put links to all the supplies in the description. For paper, I prefer Urchins 100% cotton cold press paper when I'm using masking fluid and wet on wet techniques. This paper can handle anything. I tape my paper to a plexiglass panel with Holbein soft tape. This tape holds up really well to wet washes and it doesn't tear the 100% cotton paper when I remove it. For masking fluid, I used PBO drawing gum with a small, cheap brush I only use for masking fluid. I also used a ball stylus and a dip pen. I'll show you how those work in a moment. For colors, I used Indian Throne Blue by Daniel Smith. It's a warm, purplish blue. I used Phthalo Blue by Daniel Smith, which is a very cool blue. And I used Turquoise Blue by Holbein, which is a semi-opaque blue-green. For brushes, I used a 1/2 inch flat brush and a 1 inch mottler brush by Princeton Neptune. These come in a set along with a number 8 round brush. These 3 brushes are the ones I use most often in my paintings. I also used my number 2 round by Princeton Heritage for some details. You'll also need the line drawing. I provided a link to my drawing below so you can trace and paint with me. The first step for this painting is to mask the highlights on the sea urchins. Sea urchins have all different kinds of patterns of dots and stripes. One thing many of them have in common is a star-like radial pattern that repeats 5 times around the urchin. On the line drawing, I drew some simple stripes to mark this pattern as a guide. To give you some inspiration, I'm going to make 3 different patterns on my urchins and use a few different tools to apply the masking fluid. You can make whatever patterns you like. On the top urchin, I'm going to use my brush to paint stripes. When you use a brush with masking fluid, rinse it in soapy water and pat it dry first. That will protect your bristles from the masking fluid. Rinse it off periodically and wash it really well when you're done. Then I used a stylus to make the dot pattern. With the ball stylus, the first dot is always a big dot, and then as I make more dots, they get smaller until there is no masking fluid left on the stylus. You can use that to your advantage to make dot patterns that start out larger at the top of the urchin and then taper out as they go down. I'm not gonna lie, this process takes a little time, but the result is so worth it. I spent about 30 minutes total applying masking fluid on all the urchins. So grab a cup of tea, put on your favorite music, and relax while you do this step. For the second urchin, I'm not doing any stripes. Instead, I'll use the pencil lines as a guide for where to put my dots. I'll keep the dots in between the pencil lines. This time, I'm tapering the dots horizontally so they start largest near the pencil line and get smaller toward the middle of each section. Then, for the smaller sections, I'm switching to my dip pen to make a bunch of small dots quickly. On the last urchin, I'm adding the stripes again with my brush. Then, I use my brush to make big dots down the middle of the 5 main sections. Then I went back to my dip pen to do the rest of the dots. I let the masking fluid dry completely before I started painting. For the first paint layer, I wanted to establish the base colors of the sea urchins and start to build a shadow. I painted clean water on the urchins with my 1/2 inch flat brush. Then I used my large 1 inch flat brush to drag water diagonally to the corner of the paper. I want to create a long cast shadow going off the edge of the paper. After I wet the sea urchins and the shadow area 2 to 3 times, I started applying paint at the top urchin. I painted it with indanthrone blue, which is a very purple blue. For the second urchin, I rinsed off my brush and reloaded it with phthalo blue. For the third urchin, I switched to turquoise. I wanted each urchin to have their own color, but I also don't mind if the colors blend together where the sea urchins touch. I used 3 analogous colors to paint my sea urchins. I chose analogous colors so they would blend well together on the paper and relate to each other. Most of this painting is done wet on wet, so the colors are going to mingle. To start building the cast shadow, I'm tilting my board at an angle and letting the colors run toward the bottom right corner where I pre-wet the paper. I've added a little more pigment into each of my colors, and I'm using that slightly thicker mix to paint the bottom sides of the urchins to give them a form shadow. Then I rinsed off and dried my brush so I could use it to lift out some highlights. Most importantly, I want to lift out the top edge of the front urchin. I'm lifting out any blue or purple that bled into that area. I also lifted out a sliver of reflected light at the bottom of each urchin and a highlight on the tops of the blue and purple urchins. I let the paint dry completely. In the next step, we'll start the negative painting to define each of these urchins. If you like this tutorial, please like it and subscribe to my channel. I post new watercolor tutorials every week. For the next layer, I re-wet the blue and purple urchins and the shadow. I painted around the turquoise urchin, leaving it dry. Then I dropped in the same colors of paint around the edges of the turquoise urchin. This layer defines the shape of the turquoise urchin and adds the shadow to the other 2 urchins at the same time. This technique is called negative painting because we're using the space around the turquoise urchin to define its final shape. So I'm dropping purple paint along the edge by the purple urchin, and I added blue paint along the edge near the blue urchin. Then I used turquoise below the turquoise urchin. Again, I tilted my board at an angle and let all the colors flow into the shadow. I used a tissue to soak up excess water along the tape edges. I let this layer dry completely. Now it's time to repeat the negative painting process, except this time I went around the turquoise and the blue urchins. I left those dry and re-wet the rest of the paint area. Then I dropped in my paint colors along the edges. I added purple by the purple sea urchin, blue under the blue urchin, and turquoise under the turquoise urchin. By dropping the colors in the same places on top of each other, I'm glazing those colors over each other and making the color more saturated and rich. I let this layer dry completely. While that wet area was drying, I took the opportunity to add some more form to the turquoise urchin. I did that just by glazing another layer of turquoise onto the urchin, being careful not to touch the wet edges of the shadow. After I applied the color, I rinsed my brush and dried it until it was just damp and used that to soften the edges. In the last wet on wet layer, I'm going to add the darkest shadows. Before painting the shadows, I used a thick dark mix of phthalo blue and Indian throne blue to paint the holes in the top of each urchin. To add the darkest shadows under each sea urchin, I re-wet the entire shadow area. I mixed up a very strong concentration of each color and I painted it on the wet paper. For the turquoise urchin, I painted turquoise first, but then decided to darken the shadow with phthalo blue. Then I added a dark mix of Indian throne blue closest to the urchin. I also used that darkest mix in the corners of the other shadows. The last thing I want to do is add some darker stripes to the blue urchin. I painted them over the pencil lines. I let this layer dry completely. Once the painting was completely dry, I used a masking fluid eraser to remove the masking fluid. This is the fun part where you get to see the white highlights for the first time. That bright white makes the whole painting glow and sparkle. I love how this turned out. This trio of colors is a new favorite color palette for me. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please subscribe to my channel and like this video. If you haven't seen it yet, watch the Sand Dollars negative painting tutorial next.